You know, I'm not a big fan of doing math, but I was just doing this and I had a really cool idea that Nintendo's probably never going to do. Like most aging millennials, I am a massive fan of the Nintendo 64, and I would love to play these games again without having to dust this thing off and hook it up to a giant CRT hidden behind boxes. And you know, as somebody who likes to back up their games and emulate them, but obviously, of course, not Nintendo games because I'm a good boy, I was wondering how much space do these cartridges actually hold? And after a quick Google search, I discovered that the games take between 4 to 64 megabytes, which is kind of crazy to think about because that means that this video you're watching right now is taking up more data than a video game that helped form my childhood. Anyway, after having that realization, my next thought was how many games actually came out for the N64, because there's only 34 of them on the NSO's N64 emulator. One more quick Google search and I discovered that the answer is 388 between NTSC and PAL regions. So then this is the part where I started doing some math. Now obviously every game was not 64 megabytes, but we're going to pretend that it is, so we're going to do 64 times 388, and that's going to give us 24,832. Now, for anybody who knows anything about computers, you'll know that 1 gigabyte is 1,024 megabytes. So we're going to take that number and divide it by 1,024, and that is going to give us 24.25. So what that means is that hypothetically, if every single Nintendo 64 game was the maximum 64 gigabyte capacity that those cartridges could hold, the entire lineup of games ever made for the Nintendo 64 would still only take up 24.25 gigabytes. So then, of course, I had my next thought. How much space can a Nintendo Switch cartridge actually hold? And so, with one last Google search, we see that the original cartridges held up to 32 gigabytes, but later models actually held up to 64. So that means that it would only take one of the smaller 32 gigabyte Switch cartridges to hold the entire Nintendo 64 library. I think that that would be such a cool idea, but here's why Nintendo's never going to do it. Well, the first and most obvious reason is because you're only paying for it once, so even if buying something doesn't mean you own it from Nintendo anymore, they're not going to want to give you an option where they can't continue to make money on you. And so instead, they'll just keep you paying for their Nintendo Online service and then drip feeding you games here and there, hoping that you'll stick around until your favorite Nintendo 64 game comes to their service. Those are obviously my more cynical reasons for thinking that Nintendo will never do this, but another reason has to do more with the way they handle emulation, which is that it seems like every single version of a Nintendo 64 game that they bring to the Switch has its own tuned emulator. So it's not one big emulator that just covers every game. They actually go out of their way to tune the emulation per game. And for 388 games, that is a lot. But, I mean, I still thought it'd be a cool idea.